Hey, Simone here, as always, with some insights and ideas what to really pay attention to when you're growing your business. Of course, part of that is you're growing your team, so you're adding more and more people to your environment. And, have you ever been around people who are just always negative no matter what you say to them? It can't work, it won't work. There's nothing that you can do. So that kind of dynamic can really kill your culture, your productivity, your impact, your revenue, and definitely your growth. So part of what we want, of course, what everybody wants is when you're hiring, people are really going to pay attention to that, is everybody wants a positive work environment. And when you think about, most companies' core values somewhere have like innovation and integrity and respect and whatever they're saying as kind of a generic value, but none of that stuff can happen if we have negativity as part of the culture. And it's really easy to miss that. And the problem is once it infiltrates, it's really easy for it to stay and to kind of color and filter everything that we do. So, because the truth here is negativity infects. So we have to crush it, we have to eliminate it, and really focus on always rebuilding that positive team culture. And here's the thing, when it's something that you're doing as a team, when that's awareness that you're raising with the entire team, when there's an open discussion and open communication around what it means to be negative or to tolerate negativity within the team, then everybody starts paying attention to that, and it's not just up to you. So it's really important, just like any cultural stuff. It's something that you are the guardian of, but your team members are the ones who will actively enforce and reinforce that these values are being lived. So it's something that has to be an active, a live discussion at all times, so it becomes part of your fabric. Because truth is, everybody has some negative phases. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody has moments where they're totally overwhelmed and feeling underappreciated and all that kind of stuff. So it's completely human and normal for that to happen at times. But what you want is for everybody around you to recognize that this is happening to somebody, with somebody, and that everybody becomes the supportive team that helps them get over themselves and get out of it and recalibrate and become, again, that positive, innovative, creative being, human that you had before. So the signs is really that you're noticing that somebody, and a lot of times it's somebody who's been great, and you never have to worry about that, suddenly becomes that perpetual naysayer. That whatever you're saying, the answer is it won't work, it's impossible. It's like this constant cloud of doom that is accompanying them, and no matter what you say, it all won't work. So that's a problem, because it zaps not just your energy but everybody else's energy, and it leaves this trail of demotivation behind them, and we can't have that. So everybody needs to kind of recognize the signs of that happening and then step in and work on reversing that. So how do you handle that type of situation without blowing up your culture and your company? And when you think about what negativity is really about, it's a psychological state, it's an emotional state, right? So, and a lot of times when people aren't being helped, when they're not being supported, when they're not given feedback, when it kind of starts out, it goes from the occasional instance to it becomes their identity, their constant emotional state. So it's really something we have to nip in the bud as soon as it's being noticed. Because if it's constant, you can't have that on your team. If people can't reverse it, you can't have that. You can't tolerate that, because of what we already said. It will infect everybody, and that's a really bad deal. So we have to discover why this is happening. And of course, I'm talking about people who you already know, like, and trust, who've been on your team, who've been great team members, and then suddenly they're kind of losing it. Of course, you're not going to hire somebody who comes on board being negative and as kind of that naysayer that we talked about. So this is really about recognizing this and then doing something about it right away so that you can help people adjust their emotional states so this is not an issue. So we need to find out first what changed. Pretty simple, right? And a lot of times when you are part of an organization that's growing fast, where there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of pressure, well, burnout is a definite issue. So when people are kind of in that burnout direction, it's easy to feel constantly overburdened and overwhelmed and underappreciated. So a little reality check, a little come to Jesus, a little conversation about, hey, how can I help you be better, feel better, all that kind of stuff, that, does a ton just with that particular issue. But, it could also be something that has completely nothing to do with your company. It could just be life stressors that are impacting this person. And a lot of times when you think about what really makes a person kind of lose it and kind of go into that direction, it's when stressors are stacking, so you might it might be a lot of pressure at work, but they were able to handle it until a certain point. But then, something's going wrong with their spouse, or something else happened, unwelcome financial surprises, whatever else in life that's stressing them. And then it just comes down to that moment when it's that straw that's breaking the camel's back. So we just have to make sure that we find out what's really going on, because we want to make sure that this doesn't just happen, that this doesn't go from that occasional sort of situation to kind of the go-to coping mechanism that they live in, because then we have a real problem. So, because what happens a lot of times, people aren't exactly communicative about it. They might not even notice themselves that this is happening, and that's the impact they're having on everybody else. So sometimes it really takes the peer, the good friend, the mentor to say, hey, you know what's going on with you? Just kind of noticing you're not the way you usually are, noticing this, that, and the other. Can we talk about this? So, because how it shows up for a lot of people is kind of that passive aggressive brooding, the negative comments, and sometimes it could come from unresolved conflict, because if there's something that they're not happy with, that they're not feeling heard, conflict that keeps going, that keeps getting in their way, that wears away on people. So, and what happens is, like we said earlier, it spreads throughout the entire culture. So it becomes a drain for everybody. What happens is people start disengaging. They don't feel emotionally safe. And that's a really big one, because when you have a team of people who are not feeling emotionally safe, they're not going to contribute at the highest level, which is what you need them to do. So we want to make sure that we eradicate this as soon as possible, because it will eat away at your culture. So what's really important is that you and everybody else is watching out for the signs of this happening. So you might wonder, how does it show up? Well, we already talked about the passive aggressive, but it's that ongoing, like sometimes people become really critical. Suddenly they're really critical of everything that's happening, or they're being cynical. They're like, a lot of dismissive comments or unkind comments start to happen, where you're like, where is this coming from? And a big one that's very subtle is, no matter what's being said or what's being suggested, there's always resistance to that. And that underlying resistance is almost one of the most exhausting factors, because if you're having like an open conflict, open discussion, whatever, that's much easier to handle than this constant energy drain where you feel like you're having to push. It never goes anywhere. So this is kind of when you think about conflict in general, many people are not very good at handling it. So you want positive conflict. You want that positive tension where everybody challenges each other to be better, helps people raise their state, raise their skill set. That's good stuff. It's positive stress that we actually appreciate. But because that's what fosters innovation, that's what fosters growth, that's what fosters a culture where people constantly keep growing. But the negativity, we really can't allow that, because it wears away at team unity, it damages relationships. So we have to take active steps towards eradicating this. And like I said at the beginning, this is not just on you. This is on you to start and on you to instill and implement. But then what's really important is that your leaders and all of your team members are aware of the signs, are willing to engage, and understand how important it is to guard their culture from this becoming a norm. So first thing, let's talk about the steps to take to make sure that this isn't something that becomes the norm. So first of all, got to have that one-on-one session where this person that's having trouble, their leader, whether it's you or their whoever they're reporting to, takes them aside, schedules a one-on-one session, and really has that kind of heart-to-heart with them. And it always starts out with, you want to make sure that you're actively listening, that you're empathetic, because you have to find out what the real problem is first. So it starts out with you actually telling them what you've noticed. And you want to be specific. You want to give them specific instances. You want to describe what actually happened. You want to make sure that they understand what you're actually talking about. And not just vague general, I'm just kind of noticing you're negative. I mean, that could be your maybe lead-in statement that you're saying, hey, I've kind of been noticing that you're not your usual self. There seems to be kind of a dark cloud over you. Here's some specific times when I've noticed this, because that becomes much easier for them to recognize what's going on. So once you've actually accurately and specifically described the problem so that they understand what you're actually talking about, the next part is to give them feedback about the impact this is having. And look, this is a huge, really important step, because people can get resistant. Many people are resistant about having a problem described where they're part of that. But for most people, especially when they love where they work, when they appreciate their colleagues, when they have respect for their peers and their leaders, they don't want to have a negative impact on anybody, especially not you, their colleagues, or the company. So that's the second step that you're taking after you accurately describe the problem. You talk about the impact that this behavior is having, the impact it's having on you, the impact it's having on the team, the impact it's having on the company. Kind of notice the expansive direction here. So they need to really understand that, those kind of little snarky comments are not being unnoticed, that they are impacting people, and that it's something that's not really working. So once you've done that, you want to make sure that you ask them for their perspective so you can find out what's really going on for them. So now this is kind of where you shut up and you let them talk. And this is really where active listening becomes super important, and your only job at that moment is to actively listen. So you want to hear what their perspective is, and then you want to ask them what their self-assessment of the situation is. So that's your third step. And then the fourth step is you want to set clear expectations. So you want to define what the desired behavior looks like, and then you want to make requests for how that's going to play out. And a lot of times this is also your moment where you can relate back to your core values and pull out, hey, this is what this should look like. This is how we do it here. This is what we stand for. This is how we behave. A lot of times you can talk about respect. You can talk about open-mindedness, whatever it is that they're missing, bring that back in and relate that to this is who we are, and this is what you agreed on being, and this is how we love to show you, how we love for you to show up. So this is the request that you're making, and then the fifth step is you got to build an agreement. So now you kind of told them what you'd like. It's important that we nail this down and turn this into concrete ways of being. So actually what you're going to say is, hey, so now that we talked about this, what will you do? So they can concretely, specifically reflect back to you what they've heard, what they have accepted, what they're in agreement with, and so what will they do differently. So that's the action steps that they're taking, the agreements that they're making with you, so that now you have something specific that you can follow up on, because that's going to be one of your next steps, is to make sure that you keep following up to make sure that everything is going in the right direction. And then what's really bad is if you have somebody, show up in meetings really negatively, you want to keep a lid on that as soon as possible. So when that happens is you want to become the facilitator and steer away from the negative comments and really get into a place where you actually focus on what solutions we're going to focus on, and pull out positive contributions from people, so all that negativity kind of gets buried, because that's a lot of times where it first starts showing up is on a public forum, and of course we don't want that. So when you notice that, then your next step is going to be that one-on-one we just talked about. And then, like I just said, after you do all that, the most important thing is that you have really good follow-up, where you keep tabs on the progress that's being made, where you acknowledge any shifts that are being made, anything that you hear or that you notice that is like really showing you they're showing up coachable, they've been taking this to heart, they want to make the changes because they want to be there, right? And this is where you show up as their mentor and as their coach, where you can help them with, how can I unblock? What can I do? What resources could you need? And if there's a setback, you want to address this ASAP so that they realize you're noticing. A lot of times in so many companies, giving feedback is lip service. Like where at best it happens, but then there's no follow-up, no recognition, whether it goes one way or the other. And you know what? Humans, this is not being critical here. Humans are just, most of us, path of least resistance, what's easiest, that's how we're going to go. So especially if you're making a big effort to change something, to do something differently, and then there's no acknowledgement for that, well, are you going to keep doing it? Probably not. So it's really important that either their supporting manager, leader, or you gives that feedback, gives that acknowledgement, and then if there are setbacks, that they're being addressed, so that we can consistently get somebody back on the right path. Now, if that's not happening, if you've given the feedback, if you've given the support, if they're absolutely clear what you're expecting from them and they're not turning this around, you have to make a different decision. You cannot tolerate when people stay in that space and do not change the way they do things, because it will infect your whole culture and it's going to cost you everything. So take this to heart. This is really not about creating happiness. This is a strategic move, because without having a positive culture, you're not going to foster a high performance culture. You're not going to get things done in a timely, efficient fashion. You're not going to be able to create the growth that you want to create. When you're hiring, people are not going to hire into a place that feels negative, where you can kind of feel like there's something boiling under the surface, or it feels like that sucky kind of energy. So for hiring and retention, it's super important that you don't tolerate negativity as part of your culture and environment, because that's really how you create loyal and successful team members, which means successful business. So I hope this helps. Let me know if there's anything that we can help with. We have a brand new training out there that's amazing. Go to bulletproofbusinessgrowth.com/leap. It's a free training. Go check it out. And I will talk to you next